Alright folks, we're going to take a look at this Dell Precision 690. Now this is a big computer, and as you're going to see in a minute, this is kind of Dell's copycat Mac Pro. This is the DVD drive that I actually replaced that because the original one didn't work anymore. Or it wouldn't read a disc. That's why the cover is a little loose here, and I don't have this screwed in either. I also got a card reader right here. Nice typical plethora of front ports here. And move down here a little bit. You can see we've got the nice aluminum face right here. Fairly thick and sturdy. Got our brag sticker here telling us we've got a Xeon inside. Which actually isn't true because it has two Xeons inside of it now. And it's also on this metal little stand right here. See that right there. And this thing is a beast. It's both big and heavy. I'd say this thing is probably about the same size as a Mac Pro. And it probably weighs about the same. Although this case is not aluminum. But still, Apple found a way to make an aluminum case weigh a hell of a lot on those things. See, actually, it's not the case, it's all the crap inside of the case. And yeah, so that's why I'm calling this kind of the Dell's copycat Mac Pro. So let's have a look at the inside of this big old beast. Alright, so let's go ahead and have a look at the inside of this Precision 690. At the top here, we've got a 1000-watt power supply here. We've got the hard drives are mounted up here in these bays, and there's a little fan in between these two right here. Now this is basically similar, not the same, similar is the word I'm looking for, layout to the Mac Pro, in which you've got hard drives up here. Now on that, you got them down here in their own individual trays. So it's not exactly like a Mac Pro, but it's kind of the same thing here. Got an IDE DVD drive here, which I actually did have to replace because the other one wouldn't read a disc after the first time I tried it. Got an Ethernet card that I put in here because I did a fresh install of Windows XP on this thing, and I wanted a network card that already had built-in drivers with XP, so that's why I put that in there so I could get the computer on the network. Got an XFi card here. We've got two NVIDIA Quado 3500 FX 3500s, and they're on this riser board back here, which I'll move the camera to show a little bit better. And then down here, got this cover, and behind here is the RAM and the processors. Now I did add a second processor to this, a second Xeon 5080. So if you think one Pentium D is hot, try two of them. And I did wash this cover while I had it off. Just a big shroud, basically. So you can see here again, like the Mac Pros had, they've got these memory riser boards right here. You slide this whole board out, and the RAM is mounted to that. It's interesting because these cards actually fit into only a couple. I think they slide into 4 slots on the board. This board right here, and then there's another one mounted on top of this, and that board, that pair, slides into 2 connectors on the motherboard. And what's interesting is that this board, take these out, they're just regular RAM slots. There's nothing special about them. This is a heat sink here. This is actually out of an HP, but it works. I put a little bit different fan on it, and I had to run one of these little power reducer adapters right here, so it'd be a quieter fan. Otherwise, it was really loud. I didn't feel like spending $20 for the Dell heatsink. People want way too much money for that. This works just fine. We got a massive fan right here, which you'll definitely lose fingers with if this thing is running at full tilt and you happen to stick your hand in there. That's why there's a grill on either side. We also got another fan right here with the same kind of intense strength to it, and we've got one back here. So this thing definitely flows a lot of CFM through its case. Okay, so I pulled off that support right here, and I'm not exactly sure what the point of this is. I know what the intended purpose is, but you know, it's supposed to, I guess, support the cards. If you got some big old heavy heatsink cards in here, maybe, I don't know. But this doesn't actually even contact these cards here, so it's not actually supporting anything in here. I guess it's a good thing these cards don't weigh a whole lot. So like I said before, these are Quadro 3500s, and I added the SLI cable right here. It did not come from Dell configured this way. And I'm not really sure why you would spend money on a pair of Quadros and then not configure them to be in SLI, because you want these just for triple or quad monitor. It would still give you that, but whatever. What Dell did here is that they took this board, this riser board right here, and mounted the dual cards to that. So you can see here that there's actually, let me turn the camera here, you can see that there's actually an extended slot right here. There's actually, this plate is actually removable, interchangeable. So there are some versions of these 690s that just have the standard plate going all the way down, and there's this one which has this little bump out here to accommodate this riser card back here. You can see that there's a fairly decent chip right here under this heatsink. I say that because it's got a heatsink on it. And we've got a pretty healthy power connector right here. Now, this particular era of Intel did not support SLI. This was a time when NVIDIA and Intel didn't really get along very well. So typically, prior to the X58 chipset, Intel supported Crossfire only, which is kind of funny given that that's AMD. So I believe that that's part of what this board, this riser board, is for. Maybe there's actually an NVIDIA chip under here. This board actually plugs into only one PCI Express slot, and then it splits it out into two. So I'm guessing these are running an 8X configuration, which was typical for SLI back then. A lot of boards did run SLI in 8X and not 16X PCI Express configuration. What I thought when I saw this board, this riser board, was that this board was acting as taking two of these cards and turning them basically into one dual GPU card, essentially, because that's basically what the dual GPUs cards did. They had two GPUs, they had a PCI bridge of some sort between the two, and then it went out to the connector, the single PCI Express connector. That's what I thought this was essentially doing here, but that's not the case. I did have to add this SLI bridge right here in order to get it functioning in SLI, which it worked right away. So that's a good thing. Now the Quadro FX3500, these are equivalent to the 7800 GS, I believe. And if I remember when I looked them up, I think they were spot on with that as far as the memory and RAM, GPU clock goes, and the shader and all that stuff. Some of them, the shaders are kind of limited, and there's all kinds, there's weird things to do with the Quadros, but That's what if I remember looking it up, it was the 7800 GS. I believe these were equivalent to. Okay, so I'm going to pull out one of these RAM expansion cards here. Show you what I'm talking about with that. Now these have their own power, you know, and these are not easy to pull out of here either. You know, there's no levers or anything right here. You just kind of have to grab and pull. And there you go right here. And these are fully buffered DIMMs, just like what the Mac Pros use, although they use a different heatsink. And they also spread the RAM slots out a little bit farther, because their RAM had fins on it that came out right here, which I thought was a good idea, because that actually does provide active cooling to the RAM. But as you can see, it's nothing more than 2 RAM expanders is what it essentially is. You know, those old RAM expanders that would give you, you know, convert one slot into 4 RAM slots, you know, kind of a thing. Those old 30 to 72 pin RAM expander cards. That's basically what this reminds me of. So they've got 2 of these cards in here. And you can see the actual motherboard itself just uses the standard DIMM sockets, nothing special, and there are 8 of them. You can also see I've got one blown cap right there, which apparently is pretty common on these boards when I was looking at replacement boards on eBay, which I'll talk about in a little bit later. But it's not causing a problem on this board right now, so I don't really feel like replacing it. Yeah, so that's essentially what we've got here on the inside of the Dell Precision 690. And this is going to be changing at some point, probably. I'm going to upgrade the motherboard, probably. When I say I was looking at replacement motherboards for this thing, this motherboard only supports up to the 5300 series Xeon chips, which are the 8 meg cache, not the 12 meg cache like the 5400 series is. I guess I should plug this power back in first before I go sliding that in, which I might just go ahead and put a couple of those in here, but because it's got that blown capacitor, I should probably replace the board. Because I'm thinking about just using this for my video editing, my capture box. Because right now I'm running a single Q6600 overclocked, and I'd like to upgrade that, and this would be a nice box to upgrade it to. A pair of 5450s or 54, I don't know, something or another's. And have 8 cores and 16 threads of 771 goodness running, which would be kind of interesting to see. But the only way I could do that is I'd have to buy the motherboard for the Precision T7400, which is physically identical to this one as far as the layout goes. When I was looking at that board, I think that the PCI Express slot for this right here is in a different location, I think. I'm going to have to double check that, but it seemed like it was in a little bit different location, so I don't think I'd be able to run the riser card in it, if it is, without doing some serious modification to the case. But I probably won't run SLI in it anyway, because I would need it. I'd actually like to use these video cards for testing purposes too, or maybe put them in my Athlon FX system. I'm not really sure. They'd go good in there. But I do have a pair of FX 4600s for that, so this would be kind of pointless to put in there, obviously, at that point. On the back side here, you can see the plethora of ports, and this board is essentially just a standard ATX board upside down. It's not a BTX, it is an ATX board. So we got onboard FireWire here, which no one uses anymore. We've got 6 USB ports, onboard Ethernet, PS2, so it's a real computer. Couple COM ports and a parallel port, so it really is a real computer. You can see the modified plate right here, which unscrews. You can see the screws right here holding that whole I/O cover on. So this is interchangeable here. So there's one that has just the standard layout where the cards go, and then this one's got this little shifted over section here for that riser card. I'll move this up to the top here. You can see I'm actually using a Mac Pro power cord for this because it uses this funky little square, 3-pronged square thing. See that right there? And I wasn't going to spend $10 on a damn cord. And I knew I had one. And of course the typical Dell power's on for a second while you plug power into it thing there. So yeah, it definitely blows a lot of air too, especially when I've got this thing cranking on all 4 cores. If you're wondering about power consumption, power draw, at idle during boot up, I measured this thing getting close to about 500 watts. I was running at about 450 or so on boot up during startup. When I've got this thing running SLI, all 4 cores and 8 threads kicking, it's pulling about 800 watts. It's definitely not a green PC, that's for sure. And there was a 160 gig hard drive in it, I think, and I took that out because I wanted to save the original. Well, it wasn't the original. Actually, this got upgraded. I upgraded this machine for the customer a couple of years ago to Windows 8 something or another. It's got 16 gig of RAM in it now. But I put the hard drive, a 1 terabyte hard drive in it that I had laying around here. And yeah, it works pretty good. I wanted to do gaming benchmarks because that's mainly what I focus on this channel. Even though quad Xeons are kind of pointless with that on this era of games that can't really take advantage of even 2 cores. Still, though, it's kind of interesting to see the SLI performance there. So let's go ahead and take a look at that now. So on all these benchmarks, the yellow bar represents the SLI enabled. And you can see in 3D Mark 01, there's not a whole lot of difference between the two, only a couple thousand points. 3D Mark 03, we see a pretty healthy boost there, nearly 10,000 points on there. 05 and 06 benefit too, 06 being the biggest beneficiary of all these tests. Not quite double the performance, but probably about 80% or so there. Not too bad. 3D Mark 2006 probably represents, or should represent, SLI pretty well at that point, because that's when it really took off. But the significant benefit in 3D Mark 2003 is interesting as well. So I'm not sure why that is, but 03 has also been updated over the years too, so that probably explains why it's benefiting pretty heavily there from SLI being enabled. Aqua Mark here, you can see there is a boost again with SLI being enabled, but not a big difference there, 95 versus 86, but it's still a measurable difference nonetheless. I would guess more processing power would definitely show more of an improvement in SLI. Both Far Cry and Doom basically score identical here, 75 frames per second. Doom 3, however, was actually faster in non-SLI by 2 frames per second, and I did actually repeat that several times just to make sure that it wasn't an anomaly of some sort. But yeah, it continued to run the same score every time the benchmark ended. So I don't know why that is, but that's what we got. Final Fantasy XI benchmark here. Again, there is a little bit of a improvement with the SLI, but not a big deal. I don't think you'd notice that in gameplay. I think this number actually represents how many frames were rendered throughout the test here. There's a given amount of time the test runs, and this is how many frames the system rendered during that time. But as you can see, there's not a whole lot of a difference between the two here. Pretty negligent. Halo and Crysis. You can see that Halo benefits absolutely nothing with SLI being enabled. Crysis, on the other hand, is nearly double. This is basically the same improvement percentage that we saw with 3D Mark 2006. Definitely would want to have SLI enabled with these video cards in the system. Playing Crysis at medium detail 1280 by 1024. Yeah, it's nice to see at least something benefit pretty heavily with SLI. And this would be an era-correct game for these video cards too. So it's definitely a good test for SLI. Quake 3 was kind of interesting here. As you can see, SLI with non-SMP only did 2 frames per second more. But we get to enabling SMP and we got a massive improvement there. Nearly 500 frames per second on the non-SLI versus 520 with SLI enabled. Now it's interesting that Quake 3 benefited from SLI being enabled. That's interesting because as far as I know, the game isn't written for SLI specifically, unless the latest patch that they put out had some kind of a SLI improvement. I don't think so though. SLI at the time Quake 3 was around was limited to Voodoo cards, 3DFX, and you did have the ATI Rage Fury Max, but that wasn't technically SLI. That was its own kind of a unique thing. So it's interesting to see that I guess it must be the driver, the NVIDIA driver, that's actually giving Quake a little bit of a boost here. This is an OpenGL test, so there must be a benefit to OpenGL and SLI, even if the game is not specifically written to take advantage of SLI, which I don't believe Quake 3 is. And to be expected here, Unreal Tournament did nothing. There was no improvement whatsoever with enabling SLI. And we only did 72 frames per second here on average, which is not quite as high as I thought we would be running. But again, most of these, pretty much all these except Quake 3 as far as I know, are not. Let's put it this way, Crysis is so poorly written for multi-threading that it might as well not even be multi-threaded. You can actually see posts of people that claim that Crysis still melts, quote-unquote, as I read, modern processors. So it's interesting, but it does seem to be geared more towards a video card usage than processor usage. And yeah, like I said, back then, multi-threading, it just didn't really happen, at least with gaming anyway. So after all that, this computer definitely isn't a good system for gaming as far as cost goes. I'm sure this was a pretty expensive box, so I don't have a clue how much it actually was, but I'm sure with dual quadros it was probably a few $1,000s at least. Definitely not a good gaming box for the money. Now, it did good. It's a good gaming box, but that's not its primary objective, and you can see that back then, without having SMP-aware programs, which they really weren't back then, most games still couldn't do multi-threaded back then. A lot of applications other than maybe CAD, some video editing software, things like that did, but multi-threading in games of any kind really didn't exist back then yet when the system was new. Nowadays, multi-threading, even with 4 cores, is just about every game can do that nowadays. Modern web browser would run just fine on this system. Obviously Firefox and Opera are multi-threaded, so they would take advantage of the 4 cores that this system has to offer. But as far as the games that will run well on this system, the era of games that will run well on this system, no go. Probably an upgrade of the video card to like maybe an 8800, 9800, something like that. Be able to get to run some better games, some newer games on it. But the Pentium 4 Netburst architecture that these Xeons are, I mean, they're essentially Pentium D Extreme Edition. They're just not unlocked as far as I know, is the limitation here. So they would have to be upgraded to something that's a Core 2 based Xeon or something like that before we start seeing more benefit. I actually think these cards are being held back by the processor a little bit. But we got some games that we're rocking all 4 cores. That might change. I may have to look into that sometime here and see if I can find something that'll actually run on this thing. But given the fact that the cards are kind of old, I'll probably have to upgrade those to get something a little bit newer to run on it. So anyway, thank you very much for watching the Dell Precision 690. Take care, everyone. Peace out.